I am both a creator and a destroyer of worlds. I was one of those children that everyone predicts is going to grow up to become a writer. I wrote about nations, cultures, and characters that I created from whole cloth. I designed their systems of government, transcribed their languages, invented their religions, and in my stories, for just a touch of realism, I even orchestrated ideological conflicts and societal upheavals. I can't claim that anything that I wrote was a particularly sophisticated iteration of any of these concepts. But I was endlessly attracted to what made change in these fictional environments. What if the past was dysfunctional or even toxic? And more troublingly, what if the old guard had to die in order for a new world to emerge? And what would that revolution look like? The thing that pulled me to these epic sorts of historic scale conflicts was the allure of what came next. What happens when the end isn't really the end? So you might imagine, as a kid who wrote these kinds of stories, I might have felt right at home when the zombie apocalypse genre of fiction, which is sometimes abbreviated to Zompoc, had kind of a pop cultural moment a couple of years ago. These stories are, after all, obsessed with the question of societal collapse and what comes after. Television shows, novels, and movies like The Walking Dead and World War Z show us the collapse of civilization unflinchingly, triggered by the rise of the undead and the fates of survivors who must then fight for safety and resources in a ruined world. And sadly, I feel like a little bit of a genre traitor to report that this is not the apocalypse story that I'm interested in. In Zompoc stories, everyday people have to take up arms and attempt to kill the zombies in service of protecting their loved ones. The image of the hardened, self-sufficient survivor, unbeholden to the rules of society, really struck a chord for a lot of fans. And to this day, apocalypse fiction, whether society's death knell is struck by the undead, or a monstrous plague, or some other catastrophe, it has a massive audience. The idea of being the lone survivor, or leading a band of followers in a dangerous landscape where violence may be necessary for defense, reminds us of an older cultural fiction of the Wild West. Valor in these tales is found only in the ability to protect with force. The world is a dangerous place, and only the strong can survive. And a large portion of Zompoc fans love these implications. Everyone likes to imagine that in a disaster, in some kind of catastrophe, they would be the survivor, the proverbial good person with a gun, defending their turf and their resources from hostile undead or even greedy human rivals with inferior survival skills. Few people imagine themselves as merely one of the many faceless, imperiled masses in the story of the triumphant individual survivalist. I'm not here for this story, but it is a story that we have to contend with nonetheless. It feels like a tonal disconnect to speak about this coming off the heels of Thanksgiving, a holiday where we embrace our friends and family and experience gratitude for the abundance in our lives. And I'm going to acknowledge that apocalypse is a truly frightening word, especially to those who came from punishing theologies. Yet, how we speak about this topic, the large-scale change or upheaval of what's familiar and comforting and safe, is deeply connected to our ideas around abundance versus scarcity, or community versus individualism. The traditions associated with Thanksgiving, such as the practice of openly expressing gratitude and sharing a meal with loved ones, can be good spiritual practice. And yet I find myself conflicted about Thanksgiving. Not only because our national story of the holiday erases the state-sponsored genocide and the ongoing colonization of indigenous peoples in our land, but because the abundance that many of us enjoy comes with a grave and sometimes hidden cost to the world and our people within it. The unsustainable farming practices that bring us our food, for example, our capitalist economy predicated on eternal exponential growth, the prosperity of a very few people at the expense of many more. If these things, these dysfunctional pieces of a much bigger system were to change, it becomes difficult to then imagine what that would even look like. Would we recognize that world? Would it be a change that we willingly chose before the time to choose runs out and the choice becomes made for us? One of the great truths of the time we live in is that everything is changing. The limits of our compassion and our sense of safety are tested daily with each newly reported incident of horrific violence. Last year began an increase in the frequency of hate crimes that has yet to abate. Each day seems to reveal new abuses at the hands of the powerful. We are walking on unstable ground as the solidity of our democratic institutions erodes. Even the reliability of our weather, our water, our air is in question as the US government withdraws from the Paris Climate Accord in flagrant denial of the science behind what's happening. We see the pain of this seemingly endless bad news in one another's faces, and we feel it in our bodies. We are bone tired of change at this point, and yet it goes on. Shea Stewart-Booley, a racial justice activist who lives and works here in Maine, wrote an essay that refers to 2017 as the Year of Flames. And at this point, I feel the need to mention that I did write this sermon before this morning when I came in and saw a fire truck sitting in our parking lot, but I'm gonna go ahead with the imagery anyway, with the knowledge that in here, yes, we are all safe. At times, it has felt to me like our world is on fire, and the flames are running out of control and destroying indiscriminately. Forest fires, both figurative and literal, are raging around us as if the earth itself has run out its patience with us. Neither of the traditions that I claim as my own, neither pagan nor Unitarian Universalism, espouse a theology of retribution or judgment or apocalypse, and yet I have feared that we may be in danger of experiencing all these things. It's no longer enough for me to desire to change the world or to dream of what that might be. I need to accept that the world is already changing, too far and too fast for me to alter its trajectory alone by myself. I cannot put out this forest fire. And I'm not here to play the rugged survivalist in that story. But luckily, that's not the only way to be a post-apocalyptic hero. Despite the current ubiquity and popularity of these almost cookie-cutter Zompoc stories, there have long been writers who explored more sides of world-ending catastrophes and societal collapse. Authors such as Cheryl Jordan, Octavia Butler, Starhawk, Suzanne Collins have all written novels exploring not only the crumbling of an old civilization, but the birth of new ones. The heroic characters of these books are not constrained merely by what seems possible or what is needed in this immediate moment. They're not survivalists holding down a compound or a fallout shelter with a shotgun, embracing violence to wield power. They are gardeners, teachers, preachers. They're revolutionaries and prophets. These characters remind me of Moses and Aaron from the biblical story of Exodus, prophet and priest leading their people up from a land ruined by plague and disaster. Making a way to rebuild after destruction is not, as many survival narratives would have it, contradicting humanity's base and violent nature. Indeed, it is one of our oldest stories. Through the lens of post-apocalyptic fiction, we can see two distinct ways that we as a people might handle a collapse of society as we know it. One is the way that clings to the power of the past, that defends what might be lost, that believes that might makes right. The other is the way that looks forward, that salvages what can be salvaged and looks to community for strength. One of these narratives upholds our fears about the worst in humanity, the most dreadful of our capabilities. The other lifts up the best in humanity and becomes not a story of a dying species, but a story of collective liberation. When we view calamity, disaster, and the idea of a coming apocalypse as a possibility for liberation, when we reject the ethos of domination that characterizes so many of these stories, we come to a deeper understanding of what we know to be possible within ourselves, and to a deeper understanding of how that dominating ethos has already atrophied the healing hands of this society. In her poem, A Brave and Startling Truth, Maya Angelou writes, "We, this people, on this small and drifting planet, whose hands can strike with such abandon that in a twinkling life is sapped from the living, yet those same hands can touch with such healing, irresistible tenderness that the haughty neck is happy to bow, and the proud back is glad to bend. Out of such chaos, of such contradiction, we learn that we are neither devils nor divines. It is possible to hold these two conflicting truths, that humans are capable of great destruction, that we may be in the irreversible process of making our world harder and harder to inhabit, that some humans left to their own devices would descend into cruelty, chaos, and violence, that there is rot in the heart of the wood that constructs our national story, and that rebuilding is every bit as much a part of our nature as violence. That spiritual vision, shared and tempered and nurtured, can create the basis for a community of sustainability and love, where all lives will finally matter, where we can treat one another and ourselves with care, gentleness, and forgiveness, where we lift up the voices of others and use our own voices in the service of justice, where we don't have to brandish a weapon to show our strength, nor use it against each other to show our bravery. The forest fire outside is reaching ever higher now, but we need not fear it. When lightning strikes a forest floor, flames quickly take hold, burning not only the plants and trees, but also the soil itself. But after this devastation, the carbon released into the air summons forth new growth from the ground, green shoots abundantly rising forth from the ashes. Shea Stewart Booley writes, "The flames of change can be uncomfortable, and they can at times get out of control. Through the flames, we have the potential to see something better. And the truth is, many, perhaps all of us alive today, may never see that moment. That doesn't make the necessity for action and commitment any less. If we care about the collective good, we will tend to the smoldering and ashy ground and plant the seeds now that can bloom for later generations. We can destroy, but we can also create. As we create, we liberate. There is no destruction, no apocalypse so complete and so total that it leaves no possibility for seeds to be planted in its aftermath. If we are to be consumed by this fire, may it be a gentle forest fire that lays down those seeds. If we are to be consumed in this fire, may we draw strength from the myth of the phoenix that arises from its own ashes, reborn as a bird of light. Only in this light can we finally see the tender new growth that exists for us to nurture. If we are consumed, it will not be the end for our people, for we will rise up. If we are consumed, like the green plants and like the firebird, we will rise up. In the holy dark of this passage, let us, like the sun in the new morning, rise up. My people, creators of worlds, it is time for us to rise up.
Now, if you would, please stand if you are willing and able and join in closing hymn number 38, Morning Has Broken.